Hello, dear children. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Jisha Joe. In this session, we shall start with the mechanism of respiration. The process of respiration involves various steps. The first step in the process of respiration is breathing. Breathing is otherwise called as pulmonary ventilation. It is also called as pulmonary ventilation. The second step in the process is exchange of gases. The gases involved are oxygen and carbon dioxide. Exchange of gases at the alveolar surface. The third step in the process of respiration is transport of gases. The fourth step is exchange of gases in the tissues. Exchange of gases in the tissues. And the fifth step is cellular respiration. Or it is otherwise called as internal respiration. Cellular respiration. So these are the steps which are involved in the process of respiration. Breathing, that is the first step. Second step is the exchange of gases at the alveolar surface. It is otherwise called as external respiration. External respiration. The third step is the transport of gases. The fourth step is the exchange of gases in the tissues, and the fifth step is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration we shall deal later. Respiration is a separate chapter. We shall deal with cellular respiration later. So children, we are starting with the first step in the process of respiration, which is breathing. What is breathing? We have already discussed in one of our previous videos. Breathing is just a physical or just a mechanical process of taking in of oxygen rich air and giving out of carbon dioxide rich air. We have also seen that we have the lungs as the respiratory organs, and in the previous video we have seen how the air from outside reaches the lungs. What are the passages or what are the parts of the respiratory tract and all we have seen. The conducting parts we have seen in the previous video. So we know where are these lungs located, what are actually these lungs. The lungs are formed by the network of bronchi, bronchioles and the alveoli. So the basic components or the parts which form the lungs are the bronchi, bronchioles and basically the alveoli. Okay, so alveoli forms the lungs. So lungs are actually spongy structures. They don't have muscles in them. Where are they located? They are located in the thoracic cavity, and the lungs are protected by the ribs and the sternum in front, the vertebral column at the back or behind, and the diaphragm at the base. So lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. As I told you, the lungs do not have muscles. They are not formed of muscles. They are formed of these alveoli or air sacs. Because of the absence of muscles in the lungs, lungs cannot themselves expand or contract. Okay, they cannot expand or contract on their own because they are not formed of muscles. Then how do these lungs expand? How do they take in air? The air that we take in, or the movement of the air into the lungs and out of the lungs, is due to the alternate changes taking place in the intrapulmonary pressure. The pressure inside the lungs, that is intrapulmonary pressure, which is brought about by the change in the pressure of the thoracic cavity. So lungs as such, they cannot expand or contract because they are not formed of muscles. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is due to the alternate changes in the intrapulmonary pressure, which occurs due to the change in pressure or change in volume of the thoracic cavity. You will understand better when we study the next part, what I am going to explain now. Okay, so breathing involves two stages. Okay, breathing involves two stages, inspiration and expiration. We have already seen what is the definition of breathing, the process by which air is taken in and given out. So the process of taking in of air, that is the process of inspiration, and the process of giving out of air, the carbon dioxide rich air that is given out, this process is called as expiration. So the process of breathing involves, which are the two steps, inspiration and expiration. Now what is inspiration? We have already seen it is the taking in of air. Oxygen rich air is taken into the lungs. So naturally, when air has to enter into the lungs have to expand. And as we have seen, the lungs are not formed of muscles. So how do the lungs expand? It is the lungs expand, or this expansion of the lungs is due to the expansion or increase in volume of the thoracic cavity. So let us see how this is taking place. Now we have already seen the thoracic cavity. Lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. It has the diaphragm at its base, and in the front region we have the ribs and the sternum. So for increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity, what should happen? For increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity, what should happen? Just think, what should happen to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity? How can the thoracic cavity increase in size? The diaphragm, we know the shape of the diaphragm is dome shaped. In a normal resting state, diaphragm is, or in a relaxed state, diaphragm has a dome shape. Okay, so to increase the size of the thoracic cavity, what should happen? The diaphragm should be pressed down, or the diaphragm, which is in this shape, which has this shape, has to contract. This is the relaxed state of the diaphragm. It has to contract. So when it contracts, the diaphragm flattens. And as the diaphragm flattens, it presses against the abdominal organs. It presses against the intestine and the stomach, and what happens? The abdominal wall relaxes. The muscles of the abdominal wall relax, and the abdominal wall is pushed outwards. So just look, when you inspire, when you take in air, what happens to your abdominal region? You will understand. This is because the diaphragm is pressing down on the organs in the abdominal cavity, that is the stomach and the intestine, and the wall of the abdomen is pushed outwards. Okay. Now coming back to the thoracic cavity, so we have seen the diaphragm contracts. Now what should happen to the ribs and the sternum to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity? They naturally have to move upwards and outwards. How does this happen? Suppose these are two rib bones, There are muscles present in between the rib bones. These muscles are called as intercostal muscles. Intercostal muscles. We are discussing about inspiration. So what are intercostal muscles? Muscles are present in between. Just imagine this marker as the muscles. These are the rib bones. The muscles that are present between the rib bones are called as intercostal muscles, and they are of two types: external intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles. Okay, so as we have now coming back to the thoracic cavity, we have seen during inspiration the diaphragm has to contract. Diaphragm contracts, moves downwards or flattens, then the ribs and the sternum has to move upwards and outwards. This is brought about by the contraction of the external intercostal muscles. As I told you, there are two types of intercostal muscles: internal and external intercostal muscles. Okay, so the contraction of the external intercostal muscles take place, and as a result the ribs and the sternum move upwards. Okay, so what are the things that are happening there? The diaphragm contracts. D stands for diaphragm, and let's see there, contraction of the diaphragm takes place. Then what happens? The external intercostal muscles contract. External intercostal muscles contract. Okay, so the diaphragm has flattened up, the external intercostal muscles have contracted. Now what will happen to the ribs and the sternum? Ribs and the sternum move upwards. Ribs, R stands for the ribs. Ribs move upwards. U for upwards. So the diaphragm contracts, the diaphragm flattens. Contraction of the diaphragm means diaphragm flattens. The external intercostal muscles contract, the ribs and the sternum. Sternum is that flat bone at the center. The ribs and the sternum move upwards. So what will happen naturally to the thoracic cavity? The thoracic cavity will increase in size. Diaphragm has moved down, the ribs and the sternum they both have moved upwards. So naturally there is an increase in size of the thoracic cavity. TC is thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity increases in size. So thereby increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. TV stands for thoracic volume. Okay, thoracic volume. This is just to make you to make it easier for you. I'm using these alphabets there. Okay, so TV stands for thoracic volume. Thoracic volume increases. Now what will happen as the thoracic cavity increases in size, thoracic volume increases in size, the lungs also expand. The lungs expand. So what happens? Pulmonary volume increases. Pulmonary volume increases. There will be an increase in the size of the lungs. The lungs expand. So when the lungs expand, the pressure inside the lungs decrease, isn't it? When the lungs expand, the pressure inside the lungs decrease. So pulmonary pressure, PP stands for pulmonary pressure. Pulmonary pressure decreases. Okay, so that means the air inside the lungs is at a low pressure. So naturally the air which is at a higher pressure outside will rush into the lungs. Because air is at a higher pressure outside, so air moves from a region of high pressure to a region of low pressure. So that is how inspiration is taking place. So lungs do not have muscles. The lungs are formed of alveoli or air sacs. Then how do the lungs expand? The movement of air into and out of the lungs is due to the alternate changes in the intrapulmonary pressure. Intrapulmonary pressure means the pressure inside the lungs, which is brought about by the change in the pressure of the thoracic cavity. So I hope you have understood how all these take place. So during inspiration, what happens? The thoracic cavity has to increase in size. The lungs have to become bigger. Then only the air can be taken into the lungs, isn't it? So how will the thoracic cavity increase in size? The diaphragm contracts, it flattens up. The external intercostal muscles which are present between the ribs. Intercostal muscles are muscles which are present between the rib bones. The external intercostal muscles contract, and as a result, what happens? The ribs and the sternum move upwards. So what will happen to the thoracic cavity? Thoracic cavity increases in size. So what will happen to the volume of the thoracic cavity? Thoracic volume increases. What will happen to the volume of the lungs? The pulmonary volume also increases. So what will happen to the pressure inside the lungs? The pressure decreases. Pressure inside the lungs decreases. Thoracic cavity increases in size. The lungs also expand. As the lungs expand, the pressure inside the lungs decreases, and air which is at a higher pressure outside rushes into the lungs. This is what is happening during inspiration. So I hope this is clear to you. Now if we move on to the second step or second stage of breathing, I told you breathing involves both inspiration and expiration. So what happens in inspiration we have seen. So what might happen during expiration? Just the reverse of all what we have seen. During expiration, okay, that is expiration, what should happen? The thoracic cavity should decrease in size. Okay, the lungs should contract. There should be a decrease in the thoracic cavity. So how will this happen? The diaphragm relaxes. Diaphragm comes to its original position, that is the dome-shaped position. Okay, the diaphragm relaxes. R for relaxation. Diaphragm relaxes. Then what happens to the external intercostal muscles? External intercostal muscles relax. When external intercostal muscles relax, the internal intercostal muscles contract. Okay, so during expiration, it is the internal intercostal muscles that contract. Then as a result, what will happen? The ribs and the sternum move inwards. Move inwards. So diaphragm has come back to its original shape, that is the dome shape. Then the external intercostal muscles have relaxed. So what will happen to the ribs and the sternum? The ribs and the sternum will move inwards. So what will happen to the size of the thoracic cavity? Thoracic cavity decreases in size. So what will happen to the volume of the thoracic cavity? The thoracic volume decreases. Size of the cavity decreases, so volume decreases. Then what will happen to the pulmonary volume or the volume of the lungs? Pulmonary volume decreases. So what will happen to the pressure? The lungs contract. Okay. So what will happen to the pressure? The pressure of air inside the lungs? The pressure increases. The pulmonary pressure increases. So air which is at a higher pressure inside the lungs move outwards or rushes out. So this is what is happening during expiration. So, as in the beginning I told you, the lungs lack musculature. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is brought about by the changes in the intrapulmonary pressure. How is this change taking place in the intrapulmonary pressure? It is because of the changes taking place in the pressure inside the thoracic cavity. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you. That is the first step in the process of respiration is breathing. Breathing involves both inspiration and expiration. Okay, and a normal adult man he takes 12 to 18 breaths per minute. That is the rate of breathing in a normal adult man is 12 to 18 breaths per minute. So children, I hope this session is clear to you. If you like my classes, please do subscribe to my channel and do share with your friends also, so that they also might benefit. If you have any doubts, please ask your doubts and also give your suggestions in the comment section. Thank you.